When we think about the American Revolution, we usually picture those famous paintings, right? Powdered wigs, heroic generals, big battles. But what was it actually like for the people living through it day to day? Well, we're going to peel back the layers and get into the personal, messy, and often contradictory reality of the whole thing.
For young colonists like Betsy Ambler, the revolution wasn't just some political debate. It was a feeling, a buzz in the air. The word liberty was absolutely electric. It was this promise of a brand new world, a future that held everything you could ever want. It totally captured the hearts and minds of a generation.
So, what did this powerful idea, this word liberty, actually mean to the folks on the ground? Well, for a whole lot of colonists, liberty was something you could actually touch. It was soil you could run through your fingers. With the French out of the picture in North America, it felt like there was this almost endless territory just waiting. And this almanac, it just nails that feeling, right? Liberty meant you were free to own your own property, to build a life for you and your family on your own slice of land. But, and this is a huge but, this is where the story gets really, really complicated. Because this whole fight for freedom was taking place in a land that was built on its complete opposite, slavery. Let's just start with this number, over 400,000. The entire colonial economy, especially down south, but really everywhere, was built on the forced labor of enslaved men, women, and children. Liberty for some was literally built on the bondage of others. And what's so wild about this slide is just how normal it all looks. I mean, this is a page from a Boston newspaper. You've got an ad for umbrellas sitting right next to a notice that a very fine female Negro child of a good breed is going to be given away. A 3-month-old baby. It's the chilling, casual, everyday nature of it that just rips open the deep contradiction at the heart of the society. And this disconnect is just perfectly summed up right here. You have George Washington, a man who himself enslaved people, talking about the valuable rights and privileges that are essential for any free state. The founders were using the language of liberty to protest what they saw as British tyranny, all while denying that same liberty to hundreds of thousands of people. So how did this clash of ideas, this powerful desire for liberty and land, spiral from angry protests into a full-blown bloody war? Let's walk through the steps that got them there. In just one decade, things went from bad to worse, fast. It kicked off with riots over the Stamp Act in '65. Britain's response? They sent troops into Boston, which the colonists felt was a hostile occupation. Then bam, the Boston Massacre in 1770. Every event just pushed the two sides further and further apart, until the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775 just lit the fuse on a real war. Bunker Hill, this was the point of no return. The British technically won the battle, but the cost was absolutely horrific. It proved two things. To the British, it was a brutal wake-up call that the colonists were deadly serious. And to the colonists, it showed them the terrifying, bloody price of the war they had just started. You can just feel the pure shock in the British commander's words here. General Gage could not believe how fierce the Americans were, or how many of his men were lost. We're talking about the most powerful army in the world, and they had just been handed a staggering bloody nose. Yet, after Bunker Hill, there was no going back. King George III made it official. The colonies were in open and avowed rebellion. This wasn't a protest anymore. It was war. And if you supported the patriot cause, you were now officially a traitor to the crown, and your life was on the line. Now, it's really easy to think of this as a simple fight. American patriots versus British redcoats, but the revolution was so much more complicated. It tore communities apart and pulled in nations from all over the world. It is so important to remember that this was America's first civil war. You had patriots fighting for liberty who saw the loyalists as traitors to the cause. And you had loyalists, who were loyal to the king, who saw the patriots as a dangerous mob hell-bent on destroying all law and order. We're talking neighbors, friends, even families turning on each other. And things went global real quick. It wasn't just the British and their German auxiliaries, the Hessians, against the Americans. Pretty soon, the powerhouse French army and navy jumped in on the American side. You had loyalist regiments fighting for the British. And then so many other groups, from Native American nations to enslaved people, were forced to pick a side in a fight that wasn't really their own. For Native Americans, the revolution was just an absolute catastrophe. Take the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. You might know them as the Iroquois. They had been a major political power for centuries, and this war just ripped them apart. The Mohawks sided with their old allies, the British, while the Oneida chose the Patriots. This infighting had devastating consequences for their people, no matter who won the war. So, after all that fighting, what was the final outcome? Well, a new nation was born, for sure, but its founding ideals left some of the biggest, most fundamental questions completely unresolved. And here it is, the big victory shot, right? The British surrender at Yorktown. It's a hugely important moment. But it's a victory that only happened because the French fleet and army showed up at the perfect time, trapping the British and pretty much sealing the deal for American independence. But let's rewind just a little bit, because this is a key part of the story. Back in 1775, Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore, did something both brilliant and incredibly cynical. He offered freedom to any enslaved person who escaped their patriot master to come fight for the king. He basically weaponized the patriots' own favorite word, liberty, and turned it right back against them. And you know what? Thousands of people took him up on that offer. This ad is for a man named Charles, who it says was a very shrewd, sensible fellow who ran away with a determined resolution to get liberty. For Charles and thousands like him, the British flag, not the patriot cause, was the best shot they had at actual freedom. Which is what makes this image just so powerful and so heartbreaking. While the patriots are celebrating their new nation, for the thousands of African Americans who fought for the British to gain their freedom, the American victory was a defeat. They had to be evacuated, leaving their homes forever for a really uncertain future in places like Nova Scotia or Sierra Leone. So the real takeaway is this. The revolution did create a brand new nation, founded on this really radical idea of liberty. And it inspired people all over the world. But it also very deliberately kicked the can down the road on the issue of slavery. So the promise of the revolution, well, for millions of people, it was left completely unfulfilled. And that leaves us with a question that echoes all the way from the revolution right down to today. It's a question that really every single generation has to wrestle with. How do we actually live up to that promise? How do we build a world where those ideals of life, liberty, and happiness truly, finally apply to everyone?